time for another edition of PRose with Vikki Locke and Cyndee Woolley from C2 Communications.
Yep, it's happy hour, 4:30-ish on a Tuesday, and that means PRose. That's right, two PR chicks talking about books that we love with sensational authors, and we sip beverages. I'm sipping a rosé in my home, and Cyndee is live from New York.
Live from New York in a beautiful studio, and I with such ambiance. So I'm drinking a Pinot Noir.
So your little suite is about what, 300 square feet?
Maybe 200. It's definitely spacious for New York standards. I can definitely appreciate that. But going from a 2-bedroom, 2-bath with a teenager into a studio and, staying here for a month is, we're realizing just how small the space is.
But you haven't killed each other, so there's that.
There's parks. We've been walking through the parks, and we found this fantastic salsa class out on the pier, and just a free salsa sombrosa. Give them a little love, but yeah. So definitely some outdoor culture here in New York, and we're loving it. It's just fantastic. But you were just on a family trip too, up to glamorous
Dayton, Ohio. I got a message for somebody that says it's PRose lunchtime in San Diego. That's another beautiful place too. Yes, I haven't seen family members, of course, because of COVID for years and years and years. And I finally got to spend some time, especially with my Aunt Rosemary. I'd like to dedicate this episode to her. She's 85 and loves PRose, loves it. And she loves our author that we're going to speak with today. She is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author. She's got 15 novels, including Becoming Mrs. Lewis, which was fabulous. And her latest is a book everybody's reading this summer. It is a hit. It is a must-read. It's called Surviving Savannah. And let's welcome to PRose, Patti Callahan. How are you?
Hi. I didn't know about the cocktail, so I'm feeling like left out. Like my friends didn't tell me it was a costume party or something.
I thought for sure I emailed you telling you that we're going to be drinking beverages.
Oh, well, I am at one time zone different, so it's only 3:30 here. So
okay.
I'll catch up at 4:30.
All right.
fantastic.
So where are you? Are you in Alabama right now?
I am. I'm in Birmingham right now. So we have had the most wicked storms. And I listened to you just talk about going to visit your family. And finally, all of us able to visit family and hug them. Vikki, I bet you were just ecstatic to go.
I met my niece, who's 8 months old, for the first time. And a new little nephew who's 1.5 years for the first time. So it was just weird that it had been that long and all this has happened.
I just think it's going to take us a little bit of time. I have a library event tonight in Birmingham, and I haven't done yet a lot of the big crowd that's speaking in front of, I'm used to the screen. So I think it's going to take us all a bit of transition for sure.
I can tell you, going from social distancing in apartments and locking up and face masks to crowds in Times Square, little panic attacks happening. So,
really?
Yeah, absolutely. It's you don't even think about it. You just go, there's too many people around. Back off.
Or they're in my personal space, or am I allowed? I don't know. Psychologically, I just think it's really an interesting transition. Mm-hmm. I don't want to write about it, but I do think it's interesting.
Well, speaking about writing, Surviving Savannah, I have to ask, I was obsessed with the movie Titanic. I was obsessed. So I was thinking maybe you saw it 7 or 8 times in the theater like I did, and we're all having withdrawals from this great romantic type story and all the drama that you decided, I'm just going to kind of write a story similar.
You know, it didn't even
That
cross my
didn't cross your
mind. But the impetus for the story, or the seed for the story, I actually wasn't interested at first. I even said to the man, a mariner pal of mine who told me about the story in South Carolina, I even said, I don't do shipwrecks. Like, that's not what I write about. And it took him 3 separate times in approximately 3.5 years giving me the same article over and over until I finally got that thing, that like little tingle in the back of your neck that tells you, wait a minute, maybe there's something here. So that's so funny, Vikki. I actually had like the opposite reaction, which was I don't do that, you know.
Well, Cyndee loves historical fiction, so she's obsessed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just thought the characters were so well brought out, and just I love when you can bring to life these bits of history that through emotion, through people, through the characters, and it was stunning.
Thank you, Cyndee. I feel like what happened was when I wrote my first historical fiction, which was a book called Becoming Mrs. Lewis, which
fabulous.
Thank you, Vikki. Which was about C.S. Lewis's wife. That I was bit by the bug you're talking about, Cyndee. This idea of finding these lost pieces of history, and finding the other side of the story, and finding these events that we think we know. Right? Like, we think we know the story they've told over and over and over, but there's this part of the story we don't know. And so the reason you love to read it is the reason I love to write it. So thank you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Is Everly really a person? I love that name.
You know, I don't even know where the name came from. I mean, it's one of those things that she showed up on the page with that name. And she is not real. She's the only, the whole modern day story, for those of you who don't know the book, there's a modern day element and a historical element, and we go back and forth in time, and we braid together these 2 stories that seem disparate but aren't. And the modern day story is the story that is completely imagined. Now, working with the shipwreck hunter and her research and all of that comes from my own life, because I was doing those things. But she and the characters around her are completely imagined, where the historical part is, you know, deeply researched and inspired and based on very real people.
Then you do love research.
I love the research. So before I was writing books, I was a nurse. And when I was putting myself through graduate school, I was a research nurse. And I should have known, right? Like, when we get so involved in something that we lose time, I know you both have been there. It kind of points to the things you're supposed to be doing, right? When you fall down these rabbit holes. And so I should have seen it coming, but I do. I love research, and I love finding the one thing that changes everything, right? Digging through the story and finding this little piece of information that flips what we know on its head. And that treasure hunt, to me, is really exciting and frustrating. And I want to give up, and I say I'm never doing it again, and then I
Well, what was that aha moment then in this book?
For this book, it was when there were 2 things that made me know what the book would be about. Well, probably 3, but we'll talk about 2. So the first one was that when I was first thinking about writing this novel, when I was on the fence about it, and this sounds interesting, and it gives me those little goosebumps, and it's in the area I love, and it's about Savannah, and it's about Bluffton, where my family has a home, and it's about all these things that mean something to me, but do I really want to write about it? So and it was very hard to find information on this shipwreck. It doesn't have there's not one seminal book about it. There's not a big published work about it. There's nothing like the Titanic that's out there for loads of information. So I started to do my research, and I ran across a headline one afternoon, and it said, Endurance Exploration discovers the remains of the steamship Pulaski 100 feet deep, approximately 30 miles off the coast of North Carolina. And it was one of those kind of numinous moments where you're just sitting there, what? While I was trying to find the lost stories of this ship, there was this entire shipwreck hunting crew who was trying to find, and did find, the lost artifacts, treasure, gold, silver, candlesticks, jewelry, pocket watches, of the ship. So both of us were looking for the lost things of this ship at the same time. And so I knew right then that I would braid those two stories together. And the second aha moment came when I found the family I wanted to write about and realized that their son had survived this harrowing 5 days and 5 nights at sea to become essentially a despicable man who wrought great horror in the world. And those two things were the aha moments for what the book was about.
You just gave me chills.
Oh, good. Whenever I remember that, because I'm sitting in my office right now, whenever I remember that, I get chills too, because I could have walked away from it, which I did 3 times. So I could have just walked away from it, but I didn't. And then I ran across that. And when I found out about Charles Augustus Lafayette Lamar, I realized that the book wasn't just about a shipwreck, but it was about surviving the surviving. How do we survive the surviving? What do we do with our lives? How do we respond? How do we make meaning out of something meaningless? We can become a Charlie, or we can become an Augusta, and who is the other character. So those are the two. That's a very long answer to your what was the aha moment.
But it does seem like it is so important and wonderful and timely, even though I know you didn't write this during COVID, right? But today it is so important. The surviving and coming through what we've all come through.
And not what, Cyndee? Did you say something?
Oh, my screen locked up for a second, but I'm back.
Oh, okay. You are so right, because we were talking off screen about this transition time to a new way of being. And there's this tendency when something's over, whether it's, something horrible, whether it's a divorce or an illness or cancer or whatever it might be, that you get to the other side and people are very much like, okay, now that's over. But it's not, right? We have to find a new way of being in the world. And, that book, The Body Keeps the Score, there's trauma inside of us. And then there's, how do we make meaning out of something that seems meaningless? Do we become bitter? Do we do something with it? And I think you're right that coming out of COVID, we have to find a new way of being. We can't just say, oh, well, we got through that. But how are we going to be different? What are we going to do differently? Who are we now? I have no answers, just questions.
There is a Debbie Cooperman Stone who says, I could just listen to the story of writing of this book over and over. It is really special to so many people. The reviews are outstanding. Are you nervous when you write something, or do you not care? Do you love it, it's part of you, you put it out there, or do the reviews really mean something to you?
Reviews mean something to me. And simultaneously, I can't think about them when I'm writing. If I do, which I do sometimes, I'm sure you both think about it sometimes, what do people think of what we're saying or doing? But if you stay in that place, if you stay in that space, it's paralyzing, right? worrying about what somebody is going to say about it is paralyzing. So I do my best to kind of flick that off my shoulder when I'm working, but I do read my reviews. I know authors say they don't, but I read the good ones, the bad ones, I don't read every single one of them, and I try to avoid the 1 stars because they're usually just mean. But yes, it means a lot to me when people take the time to read the book, review the book, say something, write to me, put something on Goodreads. You can't get to all of them. There's thousands of reviews, but they do mean something to me. And it means a lot to me that people, you all know, you read, to take the time to read it, review it, write it, that means something. So yes.
So have you done this kind of a deep dive into your own personal history, your backstory and your family?
A little bit. I'm kind of boring, as far as I can tell.
I don't think so.
I did my family history. I'll give you a funny story about diving. Well, I think it's fun diving into my family history. I did the 23andMe, like most of us have done, a little bit hoping for a surprise, right? Like, oh, look, I have a whole family tree from Tasmania, or something, right? And it's like, guess what? You're 99.9% Irish and British. Oh, shocking. So, but what was interesting, because then I started doing Ancestry and doing my family trees and all of that, is that my dad, who is George Callahan, and his great grandfather came from Ireland. My mom is Bonnie Steele, and she's got a little bit of both. It ended up, my dad is constantly bragging about being Irish. It ended up, my mom is about 30% more Irish than he is. And he still can't face this fact. He still will not accept that she is more Irish than him. So it's a family feud. But Ancestry does not lie. So
I had actually a cousin that sent me, all of us in our family on my mother's side, something that we had Chippewa Indian blood. And I was so excited. And then my sister-in-law in Chicago said, well, they were barbaric. They ate each other or something. And I still thought, but that's still kind of cool. And then my brother did the whole Ancestry thing that you did, and there was absolutely no truth to the Indian background. No.
No.
I know.
Well, my sister did the deep dive into my family history. We have 2 Cherokee chiefs.
You really do?
2 Cherokee chiefs, 2 generations.
So cool.
I mean, we're like 1/84th Cherokee. It's really like, it's my pinky, but I totally will own and live that Cherokee princess. Like, it's just very cool.
It is so cool to be able to say that. I don't know. I was hoping for something like that. But that is really cool. 2 Cherokee chiefs, not even, yeah. I bet there's some good stories hidden in there. Speaking of untold hidden stories,
well,
I bet there are some.
Maybe there's a real good story for Patti.
Thinking.
There could be. Apparently, so we tried to register, and our Cherokee chiefs did not go on the Trail of Tears, so they're not officially registered on the Dawes rolls, and so that registration. But I laughed. I'm like, well, they were the smart ones. They stayed behind and they lived. So
yeah, you don't have that trauma. There's so much now about genetic trauma, that it's built into our DNA. I think it's fascinating. I don't know a lot about it, but it is really fascinating to think about that.
Well, when you aren't writing, are you reading? And other than Surviving Savannah, what books would you recommend right now?
Oh, wow. I am constantly reading. It is my lifeblood. It is what, got me through childhood. It is what led me to being an author. So I'm always reading. I usually have one on audio, one on my, e-reader, one hardcover. So some of my favorite books right now. The Forest of Vanishing Stars came out this week by my cohort on Friends in Fiction, Kristen Harmel, and it's awesome. It is World War II historical fiction, Cyndee. You will love it. It is inspired by the true story of the Polish refugees who hid in the forest for 2 years. There was that movie, Daniel Day-Lewis was in it. What was that called? Defiance, I think. But this is told from a woman's point of view and a young girl living in the forest. I loved 2 books that came out this year. One you've probably heard of because it's everywhere, and it's or in the past couple months, is the Midnight Library by Matthew Haig. And then I was obsessed, and still am, with the book by Chris Whitaker called We Begin at the End. It is.
I've heard that's good in Friends in Fiction, but I haven't read it yet.
It's so good. I interviewed him for our podcast, but it's the character. It's the main character. It's this 12-year-old girl named Duchess Day Radley, and she just will not leave you. It's really great. And then there's a nonfiction book out today's Tuesday, called Bring Your Baggage and Don't Pack Light. And it is a nonfiction set of essays by Helen Ellis, who is one of the funniest people I have ever met. This is it. Bring Your Baggage and Don't Pack Light. And it has essays with titles like, the titles are hilarious. Grown Ass Ladies Gone Mild. I know. Do you remember that great essay by Nora Ephron called I Feel Bad About My Neck?
Yes.
This one, she has one called I Feel Better About My Neck. I know. So this came out today, so I'm really into it.
Now, I've got a lot of experience with musicians, and they would always tell me that they, like you in your writing, they would listen to everything, every kind of genre and music, and they would be inspired in their musical, I guess, writings. Are you the same way when you write books?
Oh gosh, I feel for every book I read that I'm astounded by, I'm simultaneously, the other book I just finished last night is called The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein, and it came out in paperback last week, but she's the one who wrote The Orphan Train. But
I love that book.
Yeah. And this book is based on a true piece of lost history about when the British sent women convicts to Australia. It was called Transport. But I read that book not only for the story, but the entire time going, how did she do this? Like, how did she do this? What is the skill she used to tell this complicated story? So yes, I'm always doing a little bit of both, reading it for pleasure and reading it to kind of figure out how they did that.
Do you ever wish that you could like talk to somebody like that, or maybe you do, and get some insight, or are there secrets that authors have from one another? So
the secret about writing for any author and for all of us is that there is no secret. That we say that because people ask, how did they come up to you, you at parties, how do you do that? Like there's a secret box only we have a key to. I don't know. It's crazy, right? So it's very much a combination of voice and skill, and some people went to journalism school. Some people like me, were a nurse first. So everybody brings to their writing this different skill set. But that's one of the reasons that Friends in Fiction is so much fun, is that we interview an author every single week and get to ask them all kinds of questions. I'm always fascinated by origin stories. Like, where did this idea come from? How did this start? And then we always ask for a writing tip and we collect them. So it is really fascinating. And at the same time, I can only write the way I write and try to get better at the way I write. I can't try to write like someone else. I can just try to get better at what I do.
So
Oh, go ahead, Cyndee.
Oh, I was going to say, what was your most fascinating origin story?
Oh, Chris Whitaker. We begin at the end. Hands down. You need to listen to that podcast where I interview him. And he has a great article in The Guardian about it. His origin story is astounding. I can't figure out whether you should read it before or after you read the book. Probably after. But either way, it is an astounding origin story for sure. And Christina Baker Klein's is really interesting too, because she lived in Australia for a while, and taught women in prison. So her life coming together for that story is really an interesting origin story too.
Mm-hmm.
When we had Emily Giffen on, the author, she was telling us, which I couldn't believe, that she had been turned down so many times, and she even got these really nasty emails just saying something like, nobody's interested.
Yep.
Did anything like that happen to you when you were trying to publish your first book?
If there's an author who didn't get rejection letters, I don't want to be friends with them. Emily's a dear friend of mine, and I find that hard to believe, even with her. But
I know. I find it hard to believe with you.
Well, I remember one time. Well, thank you. That's very kind. But I remember years ago. I'm talking 24 years ago. I entered a contest, a writing contest. This was way before the internet, or we weren't even really emailing. If you sent manuscript pages, you mailed them. And I entered a Writer's Digest contest. I have to go back and look. And I got a return envelope with all the judges' comments on the inside the envelope. It's the first time I've been brave enough to show people my work back. I'll never, ever, ever forget it. It said, "This is dull, dreary, dark, and depressing." I know. It's like, wow. So I didn't write for another 6 months, but
really,
it, almost rejection is part of the game. It's part of the game in, I am so sorry. It is part of the game in show business. It is part of the game in writing. It is part of the game in any art, right? And you get a bit of an armor around yourself after a while, but it's still not great. I mean, even after you're published, if you need to switch publishing houses, or you turn in a book idea to your editor and she doesn't want it, or it doesn't stop just because you're published.
Really?
Mm.
Wow. So you don't have a callus around your heart yet?
No, I kind of wish I could, but I'm just too mushy.
Well, before we let you go, you have another book. People are actually commenting about another book that's coming out in the fall already. So you just are the busiest person I know. You want to tell a little bit, because I want to bring you back when it comes out.
Oh, I would love to come back. So Once Upon a Wardrobe is the title of the book. It comes out on October 19th, and I'll give you a quick summary. It is the year 1950 in England, Worcester, England, and Oxford, England. There is a little boy named George. He is 8 years old, and he's very ill. He has a 17-year-old sister named Megs, who attends Oxford University and comes home on the weekends. She is a major in math and physics and believes the world is held together by logic and equations. November of 1950 is the year that a new book burst onto the scene. It was called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And George is obsessed with it. He reads it constantly. He hides in his wardrobe. He reads it nonstop. And when his sister comes home, he asks her, he says, "I know that the author teaches at your university. I need you to find him, and I need you to ask him, where did Narnia come from?" And she says no. She says absolutely not. That is ridiculous. Imagination is imagination. And yet, because she loves her brother, she tracks down Lewis and asks him, where did Narnia come from? And adventures ensue.
Ooh,
So that's what it's about.
sounds fascinating. Oh my goodness.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited about it. It grew, speaking of origin stories, it grew a little bit from these crumbs I saw in his life when I was writing Becoming Mrs. Lewis. And it also grew out of this idea that we were talking about earlier, which is, how do you ever say where a book came from? You can, there are entire encyclopedias about Narnia, but nobody knows where it came from. There are events in Lewis's life that point to it, but there is something numinous and, mysterious about imagination and about stories, and I wanted to show that.
I can't wait.
Thank you. I can't either.
Neither can our fans on Facebook. Oh my goodness, we're getting a lot of these ladies are just loving you. So thank you.
And do your kids, before we let you go, do your kids read your books?
They do. Well, I'll take that back. So I have 3 kids. I have a daughter who's 29, who has a baby and is pregnant again. I'm so excited. And then I have a son who's 26 and a son who's 23. And my daughter reads everything I write, and we talk about it. But my sons, they just use it to show off to their teachers. That's it. I don't think my sons have read even all the way through one book. Which is fun. They don't have to. They would love to take the Spanish version or the German version or whatever and take it to school.
Well, maybe they could get dates. Like, this is my mom. I could get an autographed copy.
It looks
my
emotional.
My 26-year-old son is on a junior board, like where you raise money. And he came to me the other day. He was like, I forgot to get something at the auction. We just signed a bunch of books. I'm like, seriously?
And people are writing, how can you possibly top Surviving Savannah? That's from Sharon Carlson Person. That is going to be tough. Do you ever think of that? Like, okay, maybe this is it. I don't know if I can do any better.
I don't know if I can do any better, because I want to always get better, and my books are never as good as I want them to be, as I imagine them going to be. So, but sometimes I do panic. I won't have another idea, and then all of a sudden I do. So I've learned to trust this kind of inexplicable way that story arrives. So, but yes, I have woken up in a cold sweat. There's nothing I want to write about. Nothing. And then the next day there's about 20 things I want to write about. So, yeah.
Cyndee, you got anything else before we let her go? Which I don't want to. This has been so much fun.
So much.
I know. It's so much fun, Patti. Well, I can't wait to see you again in was it September or October? Because I think
I'm coming back in October. Yeah.
October. All right. We need to get you on the calendar, and we just love talking to you, Patti. So thank you so much.
Yeah, y'all are so much fun. And I love that you're doing this. You need to spread the word about Prose. This is so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much. And I can't wait to see some of your books become movies, because they're going to be sensational.
From your mouth.
So to everybody else, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to Patti Callahan Henry for being with us. And happy hour.
Cheers.
Cheers. We'll see you next week.
I'll go find mine now.
Okay.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Join us next week for another edition of Prose with Vikki Locke and Cyndee Woolley from C2 Communications.